In February 2012, three powerful men ate pies in a Sydney penthouse. By the time dessert plates were cleared, rules protecting public land and governing multi-billion-dollar towers would never look the same. The result? A 275-meter glass monument that broke every limit, won global awards, and stands as proof of what unchecked ambition and a single closed-door lunch can buy. But how did a so-called mansion become both a symbol of architectural triumph and regulatory disgrace? The real story begins with a family legacy obsessed with risk. In 1879, Robert Clyde Pecker launched a newspaper in Hobart, laying the first stone of a family empire that would come to shape not only what Australians read, but who held sway over the country's political and economic fortunes. The Pecker name became shorthand for influence, built across generations with a single-minded focus on power, first in print, then in television, and eventually in the world of gambling. By the time Kerry Pecker inherited the reins in 1974, the family's reach had expanded to the national stage. Kerry was a man who lived by risk, staking millions on the turn of a card or the flicker of a roulette wheel. In London, he once offered to settle a casino's profits and losses with a single coin toss, $100 million riding on heads or tails. He won and lost fortunes in a single night, but always returned to the table, confident that luck, like influence, could be bent to his will. Kerry's appetite for risk extended beyond the casino floor. He famously outmaneuvered Rupert Murdoch in 1967 television standoff, forcing Murdoch to sell his stake in Television Corporation. Decades later, Murdoch would call him both the cleverest and the most ruthless operator in Australian media. The family's business dealings were often shadowed by controversy. In the 1980s, Kerry became the central figure in the Costigan Royal Commission, accused of tax evasion and links to organized crime. He dismissed the charges with a shrug, telling Parliament he felt no obligation to pay tax if he could avoid it. The government eventually cleared him, but the episode cemented the Pecker image as untouchable, masters of the loophole, always a step ahead of the law. Their power reached into the corridors of government. In the 1970s, the Rand Labour government sacked the Sydney Cricket Ground Trust to make way for Kerry's day-night cricket matches, with taxpayers footing much of the bill for new floodlights. Lottery contracts and media laws seemed to bend in their favor, drawing criticism from those who saw the Peckers as a private dynasty operating above the rules that governed ordinary Australians. Yet the family's greatest ambition was never fully realized in Kerry's lifetime. Despite repeated attempts, he failed to secure a second casino license for Sydney Harbour. The city remained just out of reach, a glittering prize that would pass to his son. When Kerry died in December 2005, he left behind more than $6 billion and a legacy of risk, privilege, and unfinished business. The weight of that inheritance now rested on James Pecker's shoulders. James Pecker stood at the head of a fortune few Australians could imagine. When his father died in December 2005, James inherited not just $6.5 billion, but a legacy built on risk and unfinished ambition. Kerry Pecker, the man who once called his son the family idiot, had spent decades trying to bring a second casino to Sydney, only to be blocked by politicians and public outrage. Now it was James's turn to try. He wasted no time. Within months, James began dismantling the media empire his family had spent a century building. He sold off television and magazine assets, convinced that the golden age of media was ending. The numbers backed him up. Media stocks were peaking, while casino shares, battered by global financial shocks, looked cheap. James saw opportunity in volatility. He poured billions into Crown Resorts, shifting the family's focus from newsrooms and boardrooms to the high roller suites of Melbourne, Perth, and Macau. This was not just a business pivot, it was a personal gamble. James had grown up in the shadow of a father who doubted his judgment, a man who traded in power and never let his son forget who built the empire. The move into casinos was a chance to prove himself, to win where Kerry had failed. He told associates the future was in gaming, not print. By 2010, Crown Resorts was the jewel in his portfolio, generating profits that dwarfed anything the family's newspapers had managed in their best years. But Sydney remained elusive. The city was the ultimate prize, a place where the Pecker name still carried weight, but also suspicion. James watched as rival casino operators circled, and as government after government kept the door closed to new entrants. He knew that normal channels would never yield what he wanted. What was needed was a new playbook, one that would take advantage of political relationships, timing, and a willingness to do what his father could not. The stage was set for a different kind of deal. James was ready to risk his fortune, his reputation, and the last of the family's goodwill on a single bet that Sydney finally could be won. In February 2012, a penthouse on Circular Quay became the unlikely birthplace of a new Sydney. Alan Jones, the radio kingmaker whose phone book held every premier's number, opened his doors to James Pecker and Premier Barry O'Farrell. The city's skyline stretched below, the harbour glinting in the afternoon sun. Lunch was simple, pies and mash, comfort food for men used to richer fare. But the conversation was anything but ordinary. Pecker, inheritor of a restless fortune, laid out his vision: a billion-dollar tower, a 6-star hotel, a casino for the world's wealthiest, built not on the city's fringe, but on its most coveted waterfront. The plan would require more than money. Barangaroo's future had already been promised to public parkland. Planning regulations, height limits, and public scrutiny stood in the way. O'Farrell, only a year into his premiership, listened. He didn't offer the usual political caution. Instead, he asked what it would take to make the project happen. Jones, ever the facilitator, watched as two ambitions aligned: a billionaire's legacy and a premier's appetite for economic glory. No aides took notes, no public record captured the moment. The meeting's details would become the subject of rumor: who said what, who promised what, who owed whom. What is known is that by the time dessert was cleared, the conversation had moved from what might be possible to how it might be done. O'Farrell suggested a rarely used mechanism buried in government policy: the unsolicited proposal. It was a process that allowed private deals to be struck behind closed doors, bypassing the competitive tenders and public hearings that had stopped the Peckers for decades. Insiders would later call it a black box. The public would not know what was being discussed or what was being traded away. In that room, the rules that governed Sydney's skyline began to bend. Barangaroo's promised parkland, once a symbol of public good, shifted quietly toward private profit. The men at the table understood the stakes. For Pecker, this was a chance to finish what his father could not. For O'Farrell, it was an opportunity to deliver a landmark project without the delays and compromises of standard process. For Jones, it was proof of his power as a broker of influence, a man who could bring together the city's most ambitious players and watch the future take shape over lunch. The meeting ended without a press release, without a photograph, without a trace in the official record. But within months, the machinery of government began to move in ways it never had before. The city would never be the same. The machinery of government began to move quietly, guided by a set of rules few in the public had ever heard of. In July 2012, the New South Wales government released its unsolicited proposals guidelines, a policy designed for rare cases, projects so unique, so valuable, that they justified bypassing the usual competition. The guidelines promised opportunity for innovation, but buried within were clauses that allowed Cabinet to negotiate directly with private proponents, shielded from public scrutiny. No competitive tenders, no public exhibition, no obligation to weigh rival offers on equal ground. On September 6, 2012, Crown Resorts submitted its formal unsolicited proposal for a luxury hotel and casino at Barangaroo. The offer landed not on the desks of planners or city councillors, but in the hands of a select unsolicited proposals steering committee, reporting straight to Cabinet. The committee's job was not to test the market, but to judge whether the proposal was unique and in the public interest. Within weeks, the project advanced to the next stage. Cabinet approved it for detailed assessment on October 24, 2012. For the public, there was no announcement, no open debate. The process unfolded behind closed doors, with documents redacted and rival bids quietly dismissed. Barangaroo's original master plan had promised open space, public foreshore, and parkland for a city growing denser by the year. Now, that vision was quietly rewritten. The government entered negotiations with Crown, granting the company exclusive rights to a prime waterfront site. In return, Crown agreed to pay a $100 million upfront fee to the state. A rival consortium, Echo Entertainment, had offered a $250 million for the same opportunity, but their bid was ruled out. Echo's proposal required exclusivity that conflicted with Crown's own, and the guidelines allowed the government to reject it without public explanation. Critics, including former Auditor General Tony Harris, warned that millions in public value were being traded away in a process designed to avoid sunlight. The guidelines themselves made no provision for public consultation at this stage. Confidentiality clauses protected every meeting, every briefing, every financial model. Deloitte was brought in to run the numbers, but even their involvement was shrouded in non-disclosure agreements and probity reports. The government's own probity advisor, retired Judge Ken Handley, flagged delays in document disclosure and potential conflicts of interest. Yet the process continued, insulated from the checks and balances that usually govern projects of this scale. By the end of 2012, the deal had advanced to formal negotiation. The details would not be released for years. What the public knew was only what filtered out through leaks and inferences, that a billion-dollar tower was being shaped in private, its approval fast-tracked by a policy created for the extraordinary, but now being wielded for the benefit of a single company. The original promise of parkland at Barangaroo faded into the background, replaced by the certainty of a new landmark, one born not of open competition, but of a black box process where the rules could be rewritten, and the winners chosen before the public ever saw the game. Wilkinson Eyre's design for Crown Sydney was chosen in 2013, beating out a short list of international heavyweights. The winning concept drew inspiration from nature, 3 glass petals twisting skyward, each rotating 60 degrees as they rose, creating a sense of movement against the hard geometry of the city. The tower's silhouette was marketed at 275 meters, pushing well beyond the height limits that had once defined Barangaroo's skyline. From the outset, the building was intended to be seen from every angle, a sculpture as much as a skyscraper, its curves reflecting the water and the city's changing light. The architects spoke of shells and sails, of a form that would echo the harbor's natural lines. Every petal was engineered to catch and bend sunlight, throwing patterns across the public foreshore below. The glass facade required more than 10,000 panels, most of them unique, no two exactly alike, each cut and set to follow the tower's gradual spiral. The effect was both deliberate and extravagant, a statement of intent from a developer who wanted not just a building, but a landmark. The competition brief had called for a hotel and residences that would rival anything in Asia, but Wilkinson Eyre's proposal went further. The tower's base opened onto a public plaza, promising new access to the waterfront. Above, the structure narrowed and twisted, each floor plate subtly different from the last. Inside, the plans called for sweeping marble lobbies, panoramic suites, and restaurants cantilevered over the harbor. The jury praised the design's ambition and sculptural quality. Some saw it as a bold addition to the skyline, others as a provocation. For the city's architects and planners, the decision set a new visual identity for Barangaroo, one that would become impossible to ignore. With the blueprint chosen, the challenge shifted from vision to execution. The engineering required to realize such a form would test the limits of Australian construction and the city's patience with a project already surrounded by controversy. Construction on Crown Sydney began in October 2016, launching a project that would reshape the city's skyline and test the limits of modern engineering. The tower's shell, designed to twist 60 degrees from base to crown, demanded a level of precision rarely attempted in Australia. More than 10,000 glass panels were fabricated for the facade, 80% of them unique in shape and size, each one mapped and installed according to a digital model that tracked every curve of the building. The concrete core, engineered to resist the twisting forces of the structure, consumed over 237,000 metric tons of material. At peak, more than 1,300 workers were on site, clocking up a total of 4 million hours to bring the tower out of the ground. The numbers alone tell the scale: 75 floors, rising to 271.3 meters, making it the tallest building in Sydney and the fourth tallest in Australia. The construction budget reached $2.2 billion, a sum that covered not only the structural demands, but also the materials chosen for their opulence. 50 types of marble sourced from quarries across Europe and Asia, and custom steelwork for the twisting exoskeleton. The logistics of assembling the building's petal-like wings required months of planning. Cranes hoisted glass and steel into place, with tolerances measured in millimeters. Engineers grappled with the challenge of wind loads on a waterfront site, using tuned mass dampers and reinforced concrete to anchor the tower against the elements. Every element, from the triple-glazed windows to the sub-basement foundations, was calculated to serve both function and spectacle. The build was not just a feat of design, but of relentless coordination between architects, engineers, and thousands of tradespeople who turned a digital vision into a physical reality. By late 2020, the shell stood complete, a twisting column of glass and steel that reflected both the ambition and the controversy of its origins. Recognition came quickly, but so did controversy. In 2021, the Empire's Skyscraper Award named Crown Sydney the best new skyscraper in the world, an honor no other Australian building had ever received. The judges praised its sculptural form, its twisting glass petals, and the way it reimagined the city's edge. The building's silhouette became a new landmark, visible from across the harbour, rising above the city's older towers like a symbol of ambition realized in steel and glass. Yet for many Sydneysiders, the tower's arrival was less a cause for celebration than a daily reminder of what had been lost. The original promise of open parkland had faded, replaced by a private monument to wealth and exclusivity. Locals gave the building a nickname, Packer's Pecker, a crude shorthand that cut through the marketing gloss and architectural jargon. The name stuck, passed from construction workers to taxi drivers to late-night talkback callers, capturing something essential about the project's place in the city's imagination. Architectural critics debated its merits, comparing Wilkinson Eyre's twisting form to the great towers of Asia and Europe. Some called it a masterwork, an Australian answer to the skyscrapers of Shanghai or Dubai. Others saw it as an intrusion, a structure out of scale with its surroundings, built on land that should have been kept for the public. Even Paul Keating, who once fought to preserve the site for open space, found himself drawn to the building's presence. He described it as having a Brancusi-like sculptural quality, a rare acknowledgement from a former prime minister known for his sharp tongue and sharper opinions. The accolades and the ridicule existed side by side. For every award, there was a protest. For every glowing review, a muttered curse about the city's changing face. The tower stood as both achievement and provocation, a physical reminder that in Sydney, beauty and controversy often share the same address. October 2016. In cities across southern China, plainclothes police swept through hotel lobbies and apartments, detaining Crown's Resorts employees one by one. Some were mid-meeting with potential clients. Others were at home with their families. By week's end, 19 staff members, 3 of them Australian citizens, had vanished into the Chinese criminal justice system. Their alleged crime, promoting gambling to Chinese citizens, an offense that carries severe penalties under Chinese law. For months, families in Australia waited for news. The detained staff were held without charge, moved between detention centers in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Zhuhai. They were denied lawyers. Some spent weeks in solitary confinement, interrogated about their work for Crown and their efforts to lure Chinese high rollers to Australia. One employee, Jerry Xu, later described losing 20 kilograms over 9 months locked in a cell, surviving on rice and boiled vegetables. Others wrote in private letters about the constant fear, the absence of daylight, and the uncertainty of when or if they would be released. Inside Crown's Melbourne headquarters, panic set in. Executives scrambled to hire lawyers in China and briefed the Department of Foreign Affairs in Canberra, hoping for quiet diplomacy. But the company's internal emails, later revealed to Australian regulators, showed more concern for the business than for the people now held overseas. Staff were told to keep quiet, to avoid public comment, to carry on as if nothing had happened. The company's China-based marketing machine, responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, had been operating in a legal gray zone for years. Warnings from legal advisors had circulated as early as 2015, flagging the risks of targeting Chinese gamblers with promises of VIP treatment and luxury suites in Sydney and Melbourne. These warnings went unheeded. Chinese law had been clear since 1949. Organizing or promoting gambling, even abroad, was illegal. Yet Crown's business model relied on circumventing these restrictions, using junket operators and discreet sales teams to entice wealthy clients. The crackdown under President Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign was well publicized. Still, Crown pressed on, its executives betting that the rewards outweighed the risks. The human cost of that gamble was now undeniable. For the detained staff, the ordeal ended only in July 2017, when the last of the Australians were released and deported. None faced trial, but all received lifetime bans from China. Some never returned to the casino industry. The episode left scars on the individuals, on their families, and on Crown itself. Inside the company, the detentions became a warning, cited by regulators and inquiry reports as evidence of reckless management and a culture that put profit ahead of people. The fallout would soon reach Australia's shores, as journalists and investigators began to ask how a business built on risk could so easily gamble with its own employees' freedom. In 2019, the New South Wales Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority launched a public inquiry into Crown Resorts, led by former Supreme Court Justice Patricia Bergin. Over months of hearings, the commission summoned executives, reviewed thousands of documents, and scrutinized every layer of Crown's operations. The inquiry's focus was blunt. Had Crown Sydney become a conduit for money laundering and organized crime? And was the company fit to hold a casino license in New South Wales? James Pecker appeared by video link from his super yacht in the South Pacific, a remote witness to the unraveling of his own legacy. During testimony, Pecker admitted to making what he called shameful and disgraceful threats against a businessman. He acknowledged his struggles with bipolar disorder and periods of absence from company affairs, but the commission pressed deeper. The evidence revealed that Crown's bank accounts had been used to wash millions of dollars in suspicious cash. The company had partnered with junket operators linked to Chinese triads, allowing criminal syndicates to move money freely through the casino's VIP rooms. Staff had been dispatched to China in pursuit of wealthy gamblers, despite internal warnings about the legal risks and the safety of employees. Some of those staff, as the inquiry heard, ended up in Chinese detention cells. The inquiry's findings landed with rare force. The 751-page Bergin report, released in February 2021, described a corporate culture that was illegal, dishonest, unethical, and exploitative. Bergin concluded that Crown Resorts was not suitable to hold a casino license in New South Wales. The report cited failures in governance, a willingness to ignore regulatory warnings, and a pattern of putting profit ahead of law and duty of care. The language was direct. Crown had facilitated money laundering, exposed staff to criminal prosecution overseas, and allowed organized crime to flourish in its gaming rooms. The company's directors, including Pecker, were found to have abdicated their responsibilities, allowing the pursuit of high-roller profits to override basic compliance and ethical standards. The impact was immediate. The casino floor at Barangaroo, built at a cost of $2.2 billion, remained closed. Gaming tables sat empty beneath chandeliers, while Crown's executives scrambled to respond to the damning verdict. The Bergin report became the blueprint for further investigations in Victoria and in Western Australia, where similar patterns of misconduct were uncovered. The judgment was clear. Crown's rise had been fueled by a culture of impunity, and the tower that dominated Sydney's skyline now stood as evidence of a system that had failed at every level. In December 2020, the doors to Crown Sydney's hotel and restaurants swung open, but the heart of the tower, the casino floor, remained sealed and silent. Chandeliers hung over empty green felt. dealers never took their places. The 24th floor gaming rooms, built for the world's wealthiest gamblers, sat in darkness while the rest of the building buzzed with activity. For regulators, the evidence was too strong to ignore. The findings of the Bergin Inquiry had been clear. Crown Resorts was unfit to hold a casino license in New South Wales. Money laundering, organized crime links, and failures of governance had turned the city's most expensive building into a monument to wasted potential. Every detail of the gaming operation came under scrutiny. Security systems were reviewed, staff underwent new checks, and the company was ordered to overhaul its leadership. Regulators imposed strict conditions: cashless gaming, mandatory tracking of transactions, and independent monitors to oversee compliance. The casino floor could not open until every demand was met. The cost of inaction was visible in every empty table and silent slot machine, a $2.2 billion investment waiting in limbo. For months, the tower's most exclusive spaces were little more than a ghostly promise. The city's skyline had changed, but the business model that justified the tower's existence had been put on indefinite hold. The fate of Crown Sydney now rested with the regulators, who held the power to decide whether the lights would ever come on in the darkened heart of Barangaroo. In February 2022, the Crown Sydney Tower changed hands in a deal that echoed through Australia's business and political circles. Blackstone, the American private equity giant, acquired Crown Resorts for $8.9 billion. For James Pecker, this was the end of a four-generation pursuit, a forced exit from the empire his family had built and gambled with for over a century. Pecker's 37% stake in Crown translated to a $3.36 billion payout, a sum that would have seemed unimaginable a decade earlier, but now felt like a consolation prize. His net worth, once estimated at $6.6 billion, dropped to around $2.7 billion after the sale. The acquisition was more than a simple transfer of shares. Blackstone inherited a company burdened by regulatory restrictions and reputational scars. The casino floor, once the centerpiece of the Barangaroo Tower, could only open under strict new conditions: cashless gaming, independent compliance monitors, and oversight that would have been unthinkable in the Pecker era. For Pecker, there was no return to the boardroom, no more remote maneuvering from yachts or overseas retreats. The deal severed the last direct link between the Pecker dynasty and Sydney's most controversial building. What remained was a $2.2 billion tower, now a trophy for international investors and a daily reminder of the risks and rewards that come with bending the rules. The sale closed the book on a family legacy, leaving behind not just a skyscraper, but a question about what it really costs to win and lose in the city's race for power. Today, Crown Tower casts its shadow over Sydney, not just as architecture, but as precedent. Unsolicited proposals now rewrite city skylines nationwide, often beyond public sight or scrutiny. When a tower costing $2.2 billion stands where promised parkland once was, it signals how swiftly power can redraw the boundaries of public trust. The question now: who decides what our cities become? Let me know what you think in the comments below.